Hey, Tarot people, in today's Tarot Tuesdays, I'm going to talk about an extremely controversial topic in the world of tarot reading and tarot archetypes, and that is the masculine and feminine representations of the archetypes in tarot. And not coincidentally to that, I'm going to talk about spirit possession, the very real phenomena of spirit possession, people, so stay tuned. My name is Shannon Douglas. I'm the author of Chasing Quicksilver. Before we get started, make sure that your finger is ready on the like or dislike position on this video, because you're either going to love it or you're going to hate it. And feel free to let me know what you think, no matter what, in the comments. If you want to follow what's going on here with Chasing Quicksilver, click the subscribe button. Wow, it's like magic, right? Tarot and the archetypes of gender seem to be a really hot topic in discussion forums online, and a really challenging one to navigate, particularly when you get somebody who is possessed by a specific worldview, let's say. I want to start out by addressing this issue of spirit possession, or possessed by a malignant thought form, or possessed by an energy. And we all have experienced this. It's likely we encounter people possessed by a spirit every single day. Now, what exactly does that mean? Okay, so I have been part of a bunch of different discussion groups online, and in one particular group there is a guy who, I think that with COVID, he couldn't go door to door handing out pamphlets anymore. So he decided that he was going to use this particular forum to proselytize and preach about rigid and really dogmatic Christian concepts. You've all seen this, right? It's the person who is so fixated on this belief model that they have identified with that you don't even know who they are. You can't tell who they are as a person, because all they're doing is spewing some kind of word salad to do with their ideological framework of reality. And the reason you don't know who they are is because if they allowed that part of their psychic self, their self complex that really is themselves out, it could not exist in the same psychic space as the ideology. This ties into a lot of what Carl Jung talked about with anima or animus possession and projection onto the outside world. And it can be really, really frightening. Now, I'm going to get real specific on that. What kind of malignant thought forms can we get possessed by besides religious thought forms? Well, political ideologies is another one. An ideology is like a religion. It has a whole certain set of mantras and passwords and sort of like levels of indoctrination that you go through in order to be accepted by the group. Now, political ideologies that we can think of that are malignant, that happened in the last century or so, communism, fascism, Nazism, really, really destructive forces where a significant cohort of the population is possessed by a religious form of thinking and a ritual form of thinking that guides them to only a few certain behavioral parameters or outcomes. We get all kinds of toxicity emerging when people can't really connect with their true selves, and they put on this mask, or they allow this spirit of this ideology to descend upon them. And when you're talking to a person like that, you have to remember you're not talking to the person, you're talking to the ideology. And they've memorized a formula of scripts and responses that are going to get chucked back at you that can't be destabilized. Another way that this manifests itself is in cults. Cults are a way of building a persona framework or an ideological possession framework and installing it in people so that you no longer can reach the person. You're talking to the cult. Okay? So that's my experience and my perception of possession. Now, I'm not going to get all archaic in the language besides using that one term, but we've known about this kind of phenomena for thousands and thousands of years. Moving on. Why am I talking about possession, right? Well, this is part of the problem when we're talking about gender and tarot. we get into ideological positions about what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman. And there's all kinds of layers and scaffolding that we've built around this in our modern day world. And we have to be very, very careful about how we assess and how we think about gender and archetypes and tarot, if we're bumping up against the kind of ideological possession that we're seeing in some circles. If you're part of those circles, you're going to be commenting now because I'm already pissing you off. So, one of the things that's happened in the world of tarot over the last century is that it has gone through an extraordinary number of iterations. At the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, the Order of the Golden Dawn was connected with an occult revival sort of milieu that was happening as people were searching for meaning in the world, and all kinds of things started to become popularized. Things like the study of Kabbalah and the study of astrology, and there was new religions founded, like the Spiritualist Church and the Mormon Church, and we had people like Helena Blavatsky and the Theosophical Society and all of their sort of occult revival activities and explorations. And one of those things that emerged or re-emerged was tarot. And tarot was reimagined a little over a century ago in the deck that we know. It's the Rider-Waite. And the Rider-Waite took all of the history of tarot that they could surmise to that point, and they folded in and reimagined or reimaged an occult sort of pictorial. Said this before, a book of leaves, a mnemonic tool to memorize and to pass on sacred and psychic constructs and the knowledge of such on to tarot practitioners. And if you're a tarot practitioner, that's kind of the secret. There's just a ton of stuff that's coded in there that's deeply, deeply meaningful and universal to human experience that was reimagined and brought together in this deck that we know as the Rider-Waite. And not far following that, we had the Tote or the Thoth deck from Aleister Crowley. Now, I've never read the Thoth deck. There's a whole set of stuff around that. And it's not because I haven't been interested in it. It's just I have too many other interests. So in my explorations of tarot, I have looked at numerous other decks over the last 23, 25 years. And I really find myself coming back over and over again to the more or less standard or reimagined Rider-Waite decks. So the current deck that I have is the Radiant Waite. They've brightened the colors and sharpened the images, but it holds all the same symbols as the original Rider-Waite. And what people do in order to make their mark in the tarot world is they create decks. And they create decks on themes and create decks on. I saw somebody the other day. What were they looking for? A jellyfish deck. I don't know. They really like jellyfish. So, there are decks built around comic book empires, and there are decks built around, a question that I've approached online in a couple of forums is, I want something that's more female positive, and I want something that's more body positive. And where's a deck that I can find that has more feminine energy in it? Well, the creators of the Rider-Waite, we're pretty specific about balancing out the masculine and feminine archetypes within the deck, because the deck is a reflection of the human psyche, and we all contain energies of masculine and feminine, and we express those to different degrees as individuals, whether we have a penis or a vagina. We can all move energy through us that is a masculine energy, and we can all move energy through us that is a feminine energy. But there are limitations to that. Dudes or people with penises, right? This is the thing now that has got J.K. Rowling into so much trouble because people were censoring their language around talking about gender and referring to referring to the feminine genetic and physiological structure as people who menstruate. This is enough to get me canceled by saying that this is kind of a ridiculous possession or spirit to be possessed by. Now, first of all, we're all individual people, and we can address and we can connect with people in our environments on a one-on-one basis. I don't give a crap what equipment you have, and neither should anybody. And I don't care how you dress and express. I don't care. That's not my walk. And it's not your walk either to determine how other people think and feel about gender. The masculine and feminine archetypes. This has turned into more of a rant, really, than an exploration of the cards. So let's imagine here in a couple of layers. The first layer of masculine, feminine, the first expression of gender in the tarot is the Fool. And if you look at the Fool card, the Fool is androgynous. It could be a young man, it could be a young woman. We really don't know, and it's painted deliberately that way. And by the way, the person who painted the Rider-Waite, for all of the people who are bashing on this supposedly unbalanced expression of tarot archetypes, was a mulatto. So she's had Jamaican and European blood, and she was queer, and she was an artist, and because of that, unfortunately, she was marginalized for her whole life. Her name was Pamela Coleman Smith, and so this notion that there's bias or there's gender tilt or anything in the Rider-Waite deck is absolutely ridiculous in my opinion. So the first card is androgynous. It's the Fool, and it actually could refer to a prepubescent individual or a young child, because there's a lot tied to the Fool archetype that connects to that kind of energy. And then we encounter the first two things, the first two expressions of archetype in the world as young children, mom and dad. Okay, there is a biological requirement to create a child. It requires a sperm and egg, and that comes from mom and dad. And we can look at the magician and the priestess as the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. We've all got one of those each. The reason that the masculine archetype is used to express the conscious mind is that it's outgoing. It's outgoing. Okay, when we think of the symbol yin and yang. Yin is inward, nurturing, creative, procreative aspect of existence. If we think of it in terms of the seasons, it's winter. It's the dark half of the year. And if we think of yang or yang, yang is actually represented as expressive or outbound. And in traditional society, if we go back in human society 200 years, masculine and feminine roles were somewhat different than they are today. There wasn't any birth control, and there wasn't any sanitation for people who menstruate, and there weren't tampons and sanitary types of tools available for women. That meant that when on a regular cycle, women really couldn't go far from home. There wasn't any public services. There wasn't any. So on top of that, without birth control, women had many children. We all have drives, right? Like we have a natural biological urges for sex. And it's hard to censor that out of our worlds or shame it out of our worlds, which was the case of a couple of hundred years ago when we were possessed by a religious spirit. And that meant that women managed fertility cycles a couple of ways. One of them was being pregnant. Another one was breastfeeding. And when women breastfeed, they don't menstruate, they don't ovulate, and not as much anyway. So it's kind of a form of tricking the body into not getting pregnant. But when women stopped breastfeeding, they became fertile again. And as a consequence, you look back, I mean, we can see this even in developing nations and first world nations. It's getting better and better, right? And women have more choice and there is birth control. But even 50 years ago, in the developing world where there was no birth control, the average number of pregnancies a woman might have would be 8 or 10 in their lifetimes. This is just human reality. And while women were close to home, we think of historic anthropology, hunter-gatherer society. So the hunter role belonged to the man. It was up to him. He was physically larger, physically faster, and wasn't encumbered or restricted or restrained by biological processes of pregnancy, breastfeeding, or menstruation. Okay, so the men would go out into the plains or into the jungle or where the savannas, wherever they were going to hunt. That's the yang energy. And the women would stay home and nurture and raise the children. And there was robust and amazing cultures for women within women's society. And there were distinct men's cultures within men's society. And the values were quite different, and the expressions of energy were quite different. And that's amazing. That's human beauty and poetry in action. So we've got this conscious mind in the magician or the wizard, and we have the unconscious mind, the yang energy, the ego, which interacts with the world, and the yin energy of consciousness, which is the unconscious mind, where we store our memories, our thoughts, our feelings, our desires, even our drives are held within us. When we express our drives, that's a yang energy, but when we process our drives through the unconscious, that's a yin process. And those are magnificent. That's a marriage, a holy marriage, or an alchemical wedding, when we can recognize that we're composed of masculine and feminine traits. Now, it goes a lot deeper than that. If you want to dive into kinds of trait expressions and things in gender, there's tons of science around this, right? Now, let's move on to the Empress and the Emperor. The Empress is the expression of the stages of women's growth and development. It's the maiden energy, the mother energy, the crone energy, all stacked into one really powerful, full expression of what it means to express the female archetype or to be a woman. Not everybody wants that, right? There are 2 members in arm's reach in my family who are transgender. And that's part of, I'm not, so I don't understand that whole process, and that's part of their walk in this life and part of their exploration as souls and part of their soul journey, and that's wonderful as far as I'm concerned. Now, when we get on to the Emperor is the top of the hierarchy. It's the hierarchical structure of power. Wow, it's the patriarchy. Men accumulate power in different ways than women accumulate power, right? A maiden has sexual power, and the kind of sexual power that can bring an empire to its knees. The siege of Troy was because Helen of Troy was so devastatingly beautiful and used her maidenly powers to entrance and bewilder and have I guess it was Paris fall completely and helplessly in love with her, such that there was a war as a consequence. That is the power of a maiden in its full expression. And if you're a maiden and you're in that stage of life where between puberty and the time that you have children, you recognize that your sexuality has a tremendous amount of power. And in our society, we reward that level of feminine power, and we elevate it, and we admire it, and we debase it. But that's nevertheless a particular type of feminine power. And as women get into power, as mothers, that takes on a whole other dimension. You don't want to fuck with Mama Bear. Okay, that's a tremendous amount of power, and a crone power is accumulated wisdom, and like you don't want to piss off a wise old crone because she'll fuck you up. She has incredible amount of power. So when I talk about masculine power and feminine power, and I talk about, okay, we're coming to the emperor here, we're talking about male expression of male power in the world. And this is where possession comes in, because there's an ideological possession that people get consumed with, that it's the patriarchy, that women culture has been dominated by men for centuries, and it's all about patriarchal structures. And this is why we get these questions about, can we balance out the genders in the deck? But so far, have you been keeping score? We have an androgyne, a male, a female, a male. Right? As we progress through the major arcana and through the minor arcana of the tarot deck, the cups and the coins, or the pentacles, are the yin energy expression of tarot, and the swords and the wands. Wow, when is a cigar not a cigar, right? When the swords and the wands are the yang energy, they're the expressive and active. So we have receptive energy and we have active energy. Those are equally balanced. When we look at the court cards of tarot, we see the page, which is androgynous feminine, knight masculine, queen feminine, king masculine, and that whole court is gender balanced. There's a progression of power demonstrated in each of those cards that balances itself out. Hey, make sure you like and subscribe. Give me a thumbs up. Give me a thumbs down. If this pisses you off, tell me why. My name is Shannon Douglas. I'm the author of Chasing Quicksilver. Tune in every Tuesday for Tarot Tuesdays when I tackle topics like this one.